Boris, thanks very much for that stimulating talk. I think it's interesting sitting in a museum talking about this destruction and redisplay on a chemist shelf. I was it was strange, but I was already thinking about the kind of installation that you might do. So I was already in the process of re-musealizing the ruins.
I would love to.
So it was sort of proof in an almost spontaneous reaction of the truth of the idea that these ruins would once again become a new archive. It was interesting. We deliberately scheduled this to have quite some time to talk and to really have an opportunity here to have more of a kind of symposium atmosphere where people shouldn't only feel like asking questions but also can make points or discuss with each other. I would ask you to speak into microphones, which I hope are around or that they need to be used here. I think I'm going to give one to Remco. Have you got one? Or do you need this? Okay, great. Because this is being broadcast or narrowcast, I would say, on the internet at the moment, and this is the only way that we can keep track of the questions. So I know that some of you have had the opportunity also to read part of the text. There was a lot of extemporization, but part of the text, which I think all of you got. And certainly by getting it, I hope that we can continue to refer to it tomorrow as well. So this really should act as a keynote for us to think about various aspects of the question of the avant-garde and its revisitation today. So I would actually like to turn it over initially and see if there are any questions at the beginning from people in the audience, and then try. This will be quite a ponderous effort at the beginning, but I hope that we can try and get some sort of discussion going, because I think that's always meaningful, particularly with a fairly intimate group like we have today. Who will be brave? Peter, thank you very much. And then Claire, I think.
Thank you, Boris. That was provocative as usual. You'll not be surprised that I'm a little suspicious of this sophistical formalism of the revolutionary event and its kind of theological supplement, because it seems to operate by a kind of I wouldn't call it a reduction, I'd call it a kind of subtraction, a kind of radical abstraction of the pure temporality of the revolutionary event from, social and historical processes in order to derive political meaning at this really subtracted theological level. And that allows you to in some sense avoid the political issues associated with the fact that your basic argument, which is I take to be in a way your conclusion, is that something like the everyday has become a work of art. So in a sense, your conclusion is the constructivist project has been, fulfilled in a late capitalist form in social networking, right? But because you do it at such an abstract level, the politics of the social relations and the place of the time of social networking and the compensatory political function of social networking, none of these things are raised because it's formal. And to just take a more concrete example in relation to the Soviet history, when you're talking about the period from the sort of mid to the late 20s, right? You present constructivism wholly in relation to production. You never present constructivism in relation to the idea of socialist consumption. Whereas the discourse of everyday life in constructivism, Arvatov, etc., is the discourse of the attempt to construct the concept of socialist consumption. But because you've done this subtraction to the theological, this level is left behind.
Well, I could not, of course, reflect on everything, yeah. But
We have time now.
we have time, and that's good. Yeah. So if we really have time, then a good question is, what is the difference between socialist consumption and Western consumption, so capitalist consumption? So socialist consumption is, of course, not consumption at all, in the sense of consumerist attitude. It is not a consumption, it is a fulfillment of certain needs that are understood as being part of human nature. And so it was not about, so the word consumption is a very ambivalent one, because consumption can be understood as satisfaction of needs. So you have to have toilet, yeah, in a building, yeah, and of desire. Yeah. So of course, in a Western economy, desire and need are kind of mixed, and you have even a lot of theories about that, about this inevitability of this kind of mix, yeah, of course. But there is no question that theoreticians and practitioners of the Russian avant-garde of the second stage tried in a very systematic way to distinguish between need and desire, and between legitimate desire and unlegitimate or illegitimate desire. And so this kind of socialist projects for the consumption were actually not the project for the consumption, but there was a project for creating a new man in which desire and need coincide. And it is a socialist man. Yeah? So it was also a kind of production. It was not about consumption, but it was about production. As Stalin said, it's engineering of the human souls, and not engineering of machines, but engineering of the human souls in terms of putting the human being in a certain surrounding and putting him under a certain condition where this identification is achieved, and where this socialist subject accepts his needs as desire and his desires as needs. And I can show in very concrete examples how this worked, yeah, in Melnikov and many other people. So if you look at the contemporary situation, if you would say that the contemporary situation realized the utopia of Russian constructivism, then I would say yes, but in negative way. Because the utopia of Russian constructionism was a belief in a possibility of this identification between desires and needs, and that human beings understand human nature, accept their own nature, and will be satisfied with that. There's no way to negate the fact that we live in a society that everybody is unsatisfied. Everybody is unsatisfied, everybody is unhappy, everybody is frustrated, everybody hates what he presents to the world and what presents to him. So we have this total aestheticization, but we have this total aestheticization as medium of deep frustration and source of deep dissatisfaction with one's own image. Yeah? The topic of Lacan, yeah, begins already with Sartre, with Merleau-Ponty, and with Lacan. So this utopia of total aestheticization is realized by late capitalism as a total dystopia. But living in this total dystopia, we cannot escape it. So even if we are not satisfied with our own image, the only one thing we have to do is to correct it. We know that this corrected image is even worse as the image that was before. But we can't escape this move. And so it's going and going further and further. Yeah? And that we are going into this logic of frustration deeper and deeper. But to look at that and to understand this process, we rather have to look at Sartre and Lacan as a Russian constructivist. What the Russian constructivism tried is to create a balance, is to create a balance between production and construction, balance between needs and desires. And of course, it didn't happen. And of course, what we live in is opposite of it. Right? And then if you say, maybe it's the last remark, if you say that I am not historical, it's not because I am personally not historical. I am as historical as everybody else. It's because I tried to sematize a certain strategy of non-historicity that was implied by certain avant-garde practices. It's not that I somehow suddenly become to be an avant-gardist. Yeah? I am as, as everybody else. Yeah? But I look at that moment, I look at the strategy, and I try to ask myself what the strategy is, what the people actually asked for, yeah, what they actually want to get at, and what came out of it. Yeah? So it's analysis of a certain phenomenon. It's not a prescription of how we can speak about that and think about that.
Can I just clarify one thing, which I think a tiny little bit picks up on one of Peter's questions, and it's related to the commitment that many of the avant-garde artists that we're talking about, and particularly Malevich, who you singled out, had to education. Mm-hmm. Because in a sense, when you talk about Malevich at the same time writing this beautiful text of the destruction of the museum and therefore the destruction of the past, it's destruction of the first layer of the past because they had to produce something else. And at the same time, his rejection of the futurism of constructivism. It seems that he's completely in the present then. That's the only place that he can be, at least on a chronological timeline. But at the same time, he invested a lot of his time, certainly in the post-revolutionary period, in education. And seeing education, in a sense, as a building, as a construction of some sort of idea of the new human. Now, that education also had a relation to tradition. I mean, there was something that was being educated, which wasn't only the present moment, it seems to me, that education of necessity requires some kind of tradition.
Well, so if you look at the seminal and most important text of Malevich written on education, additional element in painting, then he speaks about bacillus of civilization, culture, and modernity. So he thinks that we are infected by modernity. Yeah, in a way that we are complete sick. Yeah? We are complete ill. So we are not constructed. We are destabilized, and we are completely unhappy and actually mortally ill. And then he speaks in a different text. Yeah, if you are, for example, you get a bacillus. He thought it's bacillus, flu. Yeah? Mm. So you are maybe unhappy that you have a flu, but you have to think that these bacillus are very happy, yeah, to live in your organism at that time, because they feel themselves very good. And from the position of art, he says, the attitude and position of bacilla is not better and not worse as organism in which this bacillus are. So what is the way of education? The way of education is our ability to accept us being ill, non-healthy, infected, unhappy, and distracted. Yeah? And to make art out of it as a radical acceptance of this possibility. And he said that you look very well how it happens if you are For example, if you are a student in art school and living in the big city like Petersburg, then you are attacked by bacillus for all directions, from the other students, from the professors, from the urban life. So you are all the time distracted, yeah? All the time under the distraction, in decomposition. And so the art you produce is very good. But some artists decide to go to province and to become healthier. They spend some time, for example, in a village or at the sea. And they come back after some months looking very healthy, very good, and produce very bad art. So his advice was always be infected, always being happy, never be healthy, never make vacations, then everything will be good. So it is not about...
Sounds like a contemporary description of the artist now.
It is. It is. As I read it, I saw his description of what artist is today. Absolutely. Yeah. He saw that completely clearly at that moment, at the beginning of the 30s, end of the beginning of the 30s.
Please. Yes.
I a bit disagree with several points, and one of the points is about that Russian avant-garde was not accepted by the masses. And I think that I just recently bought a book about mass activities, all this celebration, and in the open air they have a huge demonstration, and where all these avant-garde artists are participated in a decoration, and that all these masses, and they are really very enthusiastic about the avant-garde art. And then about Malevich and his, you say that Russian avant-garde is anti-nostalgia, but Malevich himself, he was really have a big nostalgia to his creations. He always changed data in his architectons, he changed data in his texts. He just created a new history. And then in his last letters, when he understands that political situation go bad direction, and also he was very unhappy with what Bukharin wrote, and then he wrote a letter to Lunacharsky to ask him that he would like to buy his paintings back. And all this also Rijksmuseum collection is a very good example how Malevich thought that how I can preserve my art. And this is really very historic and very nostalgic in my eyes. And then your talk about revolution and counter-revolution, your support Vladimir Paperny's idea of culture one, culture two, because sometimes it looks a very good scheme to put all these different facts. And when we speak about Russian constructivists, it's also very difficult because you have also constructivists in architecture. And then if you look at them, they are also not the same if you look at Ginsburg. He has just really a German-like functional method that you find functions, you try to find a connection between functions, and then you materialize it in an architectural form. And then the last phase of Russian constructivism, Leonidov, he just goes from just absolutely different point. He creates first form, and just an ideal form where you can put any function you will. And he says that if you will have just a superficial extra space, it will fit any function. It means that the picture of avant-garde is so diverse that you cannot put it in one abstract scheme.
Well, it's a lot of points indeed here. But if you look at the Malevich and begin by looking at Malevich, Malevich always said that a true artist has to do art against his own taste and against his own nature. And that means that he very well understood that his nature does not coincide with his art. And then speaking about making art and dating in a different way, if you look at his teachings material, the black square, it at the end, is put at the end of the art history and at the end of his own development. So if he made something that didn't look like a black square, after black square, he put the date, false date, as if it was made before. So that not to compromise the scheme. And actually, at the moment he made a black square, he also made his coffin and his grave built on the basis of black square. Yeah, so he began to make art from the perspective of his death from that moment. Yeah, so it was a kind of end point of art history and point of his own art. Now, if we speak about mass demonstration, mass demonstration were not freewheeling and I don't know, expression of true political tastes and aesthetic tastes of the Soviet masses. It was organized from above, it was organized by the state, and it was organized in a way in which the state elected to be organized. And the taste of the state, as we know, changed by time. Yeah, it was one taste in 20s and another taste. To say that this multifunctional space is against function is something like to believe in new Italian theories about immaterial worker and coming after I don't know what. Yeah. So multifunctional is even worse than functional. It's the same functional, but even worse. Yeah. And there is nothing in the world that is post-Taylorism, post-functionality. So it's the next step of exploitation. Right? So if you exploit it in a kind of rigid way, now you are exploited in a flexible way, and that is even worse exploitation, in fact. So, and that was also not my point. My point was not to investigate development of avant-garde in all its different possibilities, but to indicate a point, and that is 2021, when we see, you can compare it to Duchamp, you can compare it to Dada in Zurich, Berlin, and so on and so on. And the same years everywhere, yeah? So 20 begins 21st, you have a certain kind of discord between initial gesture avant-garde and the first generation, second generation. So between first generation, that made this radical reductive gesture, the next generation that begins to use this gesture for different purposes, be it political propaganda, be it building of new society, be it a new technical design, be it something different. And you have a kind of bifurcation at that moment. And that moment of bifurcation is what I try to indicate, not what came out.
But is then, sorry, if somebody's got a new question, please prepare it. But is the way that you distinguish Malevich from his colleagues, particularly his constructivist colleagues, then Tatlin, Rodchenko, even Lizitsky, is Malevich then the archetypal avant-garde artist for you? I mean, is he the Russian avant-garde, in a sense? And that when this bifurcation comes, then the people who bifurcate are no longer avant-gardist in the definition that you're using?
Oh, well, that's... why be so interesting definitions? I think that what happens, if you want to say something, you want to say something polemically, because if you don't do that, then it's not understood what actually you have in mind. And the problem is, and this is a problem that is accepted by everyone, by everyone. It's a problem that speaking about avant-garde, be it in Russia, be it outside of Russia, but especially Russia, we speak about the 20s. We speak about the 20s Italian Futurism 20s, Bauhaus, yeah, all the time, yeah, the 20s. And so there is a kind of suppression of the first gesture. And it's kind of forgetting an erasure of this kind of bifurcation. It's a kind of erasure of certain decisions that were taken at a certain time. And I think that is ground why also 60s and why also contemporary situation is presented kind of blurred. Yeah, you know, utopian and politically engaged and reduction and this is that. It is all the same. Yeah? It's somehow kind of mix, yeah. But it was not a mix. It was not a mix, it was a kind of confrontation. People hated each other, didn't speak to each other. Malevich was friend of Khrushchev, he hated Khlebnikov. Yeah? Khlebnikov was friend of Tatlin, he hated Malevich. Yeah? They hated each other, and so on and so on. And they didn't hate each other because they were so different in temperament, yeah? But because they experienced the strategies as being contrarian. Yeah? And then if you look from contemporary perspective, yeah, look at that time and say Russian avant-garde. It's a term that, first of all, never existed. Yeah? Never existed. It was invented in the 60s. And then retrospectively put on this time with futurism and suprematism.
Who was it invented by? Do you know, was it invented in the Soviet Union or outside?
No, it was invented, of course, outside.
Yeah.
It was, of course, invented outside. And, of course, the seminal text for this invented is the Kitchen Avant-Garde. Because, of course, it comes from the Partisan Review on the one hand, on the other hand, from Paggioli. Yeah? So the book on the avant-garde, Italian avant-garde, that he written immediately after World War II, and that was in the first place, yeah, about Italian avant-garde and Paris, yeah, of the 20th, was then projected on Russian avant-garde, especially in the publication of the 60s. But it was never, this generalized term of Russian avant-garde covers very different, and in many cases contrarian strategies of individual artists. And actually, presents the whole time as a time of kind of, you know, peaceful and utopian enthusiasm, yeah? And it was time of ideological and artistic struggle. And what I try to show is how this struggle took place and what the positions are, yeah? And to uncover the tensions of this period and issues and options that were there, yeah? And I kind of covered in our retrospective imagination was this notion of Russian avant-garde, which is very fuzzy somehow.
Yeah, I have maybe some kind of observation or bouncing from your last remark. As it's known, the major war is not between black and white. The major war is between white and off-white.
Of course.
When the clothes then become different. But again, it's not a question, it's more a point to discuss with everybody. By the end of your lecture, you mentioned this need, almost obligation of us to be artists today. So we have to reinvent, we have to create ourselves. And you mentioned examples of Facebooks and YouTubes. Well, interesting that in all these medias, we rarely create ourselves. We're actually using templates. We quickly copy and modify somebody else's templates for creating our identity. Same as, for example, in fashion. We rarely do our own design. We better go into in diverse shops and diverse fashion brands. Same as actually with art. We don't have to obey a particular art school now. We can combine. We can play with art. It's interesting that in Varnavia we now have exhibition Play. Art is a playful exploration. I can try this movement now, and I can try with other artists tomorrow. I can also be different myself. So this playfulness, this unseriousness, art is thought experiments, if you wish. And then if I compare it with the avant-garde of Russians, or any like avant-garde of those times, it's dead serious. As you mentioned yourself, they were dying for that. It's a personal commitment, it's a political commitment, it's this Russian expression that poet is always more than a poet. The artist is more than an artist, always a politician, it's an engineer of human souls and so on. So how would you comment on this need or maybe contemporary understanding of art as a possibilities, as a playful exploration of possibilities, compared to very, very radical and dead serious movement of avant-garde? Avant-garde itself is a military term.
Yeah, and that's why it's a false one, yeah, I would say. Because real avant-garde is not the people going somewhere, they're already there. Yes, that's serious, yeah. I think Trotsky was very right about that, because what happens in the West is that, you know, you are struggling, you are dying, yeah, you have hunger, yeah, and so on and so on. And if you make it, if you made it, you begin to sell, and so you commercialize all the things, you go into the art market, yeah, and so this kind of period of ambition and struggling and suffering takes like a couple of years and 3 years. If you struggle more than that, it probably you'll never succeed. Yeah. So it takes some time. But in the Soviet Union, at the moment at which actually Russian avant-garde should be, and I quote Trotsky, should be commercialized, art market disappeared, and market disappeared as such. And so Trotsky says, and he has it right, yeah, the exceptional case of Russian avant-garde is that Russian avant-garde could extend the struggle and tragedy and politics and suffering and utopian thinking for decades and decades and decades. You can do, but you can't do that only under the condition of socialism, and that's why socialism good for art, yeah, I would say, in many ways. So socialism excludes the possibility of commercialization simply, yeah, because you have aesthetics against aesthetics, yeah, you have state aesthetics, you have your own aesthetics, and you have the field of struggle between them. Yeah, I don't have this kind of mediation through the art market that kills both of them. So you have this kind of situation. It's not a utopian situation, but it is a situation that saves art, yeah, and that saves Russian avant-garde. And I agree with Trotsky on that point. Yeah. I mean, it's really a historical exception, yeah, because of that. Claire, you wanted to say?
Yeah, thank you. I have to say I'm completely confused by your lecture, but it's I feel like you've run me round in circles and circles and circles by conflating various terms together, and one of them is reduction and revolution, which seem to come to stand for the same thing by the end of the lecture. But I want to pick up on something towards the end, when you start talking about the possible realization of the avant-garde within social networking sites. But you said something that if we look at art from the position of spectatorship, then how did you phrase it? It was something about sort of the radical potential of Malevich is that everyone can do a black square. Yeah. So this is how we can understand that radicality is that about its mass potential. So okay. So if we look at you use this phrase, if we look at art from the position of spectatorship, but I don't know if there's any other position from which we can look at art, because art presupposes a spectatorship. And this is why Twitter and YouTube and other networking sites that you mentioned are precisely not art, because there's a foreclosure of spectatorship in the sense that you've been referring to. Sorry, it's not a very clear question. Well,
first of all, well, it's an important point there, revolution and reduction. At least Russian avant-garde understood revolution as reduction. At least Rousseau understood revolution as reduction. Yeah? So Rousseau understood revolution as reduction to the human needs and human nature, abolishment of, civilization, wrong civilization, and return to the basics. Yeah? And actually, Russian avant-garde saw the revolution as reduction, and that I reproduce that actually. And so also everything that happened at that time as being a part of avant-garde aesthetics. You know, after the revolution, Shklovsky came back to Petersburg and was Nevsky Prospect, and he saw a corpse of a horse lying off Nevsky Prospect, and people coming and taking piece of meat and immediately devouring that. And he looked at that and said, it's a very interesting illustration of mass theory of defamiliarization, this defamiliarization of Nevsky Prospect. So we can look at the revolutionary event in terms of formalist aesthetics, yeah. Russian radical formalist aesthetics, and it was created to describe this kind of phenomenon. Yeah? So they are interconnected. Now the second point is about what is art and what is not art. That's interesting point. That interesting point that precisely relates to the question of former West, and especially from the East. So in my time, in the Soviet Union, there was no art market. And art that was made, maybe even officially, but in any case unofficially, so in the circles I was circulating at that time, was made for other artists. Yeah? So there was no difference in the audience between spectator and artist. If we made art, then the access and visibility for this art were only inside this artistic community. So the artist coincided with the spectator. That is why a lot of people said that's not art. Actually, even inside the system itself, Kabakov, for example, already in the 50s said that the whole Soviet art is not art because there is no differentiation between spectator and creator. So he used the same argument in the 50s against his own position and against his own milieu. On the other hand, what it seems to me to happen is that this Russian unofficial situation becomes a universal one. So what happens is that everybody looks at something and does something, yeah? Writes something and reads something, create something, and so on and so on. So the difference between creator and consumer in art begins to be blurred and disappears. That is a process that sociologically already was fixed about the phenomenon of consumption by the working class. Yeah? So already Bell wrote that, Daniel Bell wrote that, contemporary worker is producer and consumer at the same time. Yeah? And that undermines the traditional class structure of society. So the question is, if this new condition is the end of art or the transformation of art? That's a Kabakovian question. And I agree we can answer this question one way or another. It's maybe an end of art, as we know that. On the other hand, as I indicated, I see that art documentation instead of art, glimpse into the art work instead of seeing its entirety, undermines already on the level of the technique of art production as a traditional criteria of identification of the work of art and its function in centuries and centuries. Yeah. So we have now a very, on a different level, a very substantial transformation that can be seen as simply end of art in classical sense, in the sense in which art, in which producer and consumer are clearly differentiated, or as a transformation. And then maybe a methodical question. Of course, I was moving in the circles, but I was moving in the circles not to confuse somebody, but to clarify. I know that if you try to clarify, you always confuse. That's always the case. But what I try to show is that there are repetitive circles. There is no line, yeah, but the repetitive circles that repeat a certain movement on different levels and different time. How you can explain that different way, I don't know.
There's one more at the back. Can I just intervene for a moment? Because in answer to that question, I was thinking about what tomorrow we're going to hear for some artists as well. Anton is here, and Tanya and Lisbeth and Jos, Rick van der Pol will be coming. And I suppose, I mean, what you just said about the possible end of art or its transformation, the transformation that you described doesn't leave a role for a traditional art figure, not an author in that sense.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah, I think it's heavy. It's just crushed. Yeah. It was reduced. It was reduced. It was reduced under our eyes. I think it's a lot of things just were reduced. We maybe don't see that in this way, but they are not there. Yeah. Simply. And if you speak about template, actually, already Duchamp said that the only way to do art is as ready-made, because if you buy, his example, if you buy colors, yeah, if you buy
paint,
yes, you buy paints, you buy canvas, yeah, it's ready-made, yeah, whatever you made out of it, it's already ready-made because you bought it, yeah. So everything is ready-made. We're living in a situation, everything is template ready-made. And already that undermines this concept of whatever, yeah, from the beginning. Yeah, that's no question.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify that, but please.
Hi, I was thinking about that sort of famous statement by Lunacharsky about how the artistic revolution predated the political or the social revolution. And then your question about art and the production of subjectivity, the production of a new man. And I was thinking about that in relation to the work of Alain Badiou, who in this essay on the subject of art claims that the role for contemporary art is to produce a new model of subjectivity. And in trying to apply that as an art historian, I always feel stuck by the problem of the fact that he says that a work of art cannot be an event. Yeah, but I seem to understand that you're arguing for the black square and the urinal as an event, and Badiou's argument is kind of formal as well. I suppose that this is a formal event that produces the possibility to imagine something new. So this is revolutionary. But the problem for Badiou is that the event is always unnameable, and so it can't be the revolution. So I'm wondering whether you find Badiou useful. What is your opinion, I suppose, of Badiou's model of art and its relationship to the revolutionary event and subjectivity?
Well, Badiou, as well as Rancière, yeah. But let us look at Badiou. Seems to me somebody who has chosen, or was chosen, yeah, whatever, to ignore 90% of things happen around him. Yeah? Yeah? And it's an interesting strategy. Yeah? If you speak about artwork, you don't think about art market, you don't think about this, you don't think about that, you don't think about all this, you know, discourse about autonomy. Yeah? You just look at Mallarmé. Yeah? You maybe do not read Beckett, but you read what Adorno wrote about Beckett. Yeah? And maybe a couple other texts, and you made art theory out of it, yeah? And you made art theory out of it, and you ignore everything that ever happened after that, yeah? Or happened around it, yeah? So all this discussion about autonomous art being a commodity on the art market, and also the role of subjectivity. The role of subjectivity is always a good thing for him, because French state is always a bad one, yeah? But he argues like American Republican right, yeah? State is always bad, subjectivity is always good. I am not very sure about that. Yeah? I'm not very sure about political right in America. I'm not very sure about Badiou. Yeah, I'm not very sure about French philosophy in general. That only wants to deconstruct art, state. Yeah, maybe state can be used for some other purposes. But it's a problem of French intellectuals. The second problem is, of course, it's not my problem. But second problem is, of course, the problem that they do not believe both of them. And it's very strange. After so many decades, that art can be bad. I mean, simply evil. Yeah? Subjectivity can be evil. If you open the space, it can be evil space. Yeah, in Rancière. It can be evil people who come into it. Yeah? It's not only that you give voice to somebody is always good. What you hear from him, it can be pretty terrible. Yeah. So it's a theory that completely ignores the tragic history of 20th century art, completely ignores, relation between fascism and expressionism, between futurism and so on and so on. It is a discourse of simulacrum of innocence, yeah, as if somebody comes and, oh great, yeah, let us create a space for everybody to speak. Let us create a true subjectivity. It's somehow strange, but it's very effective. Yeah, I mean, so it's an efficient way of speaking, but it's very problematic because it just ignores things, just doesn't take them in consideration and doesn't react to them.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, one from Steven in the back.
Yeah, I want to comment on this idea of template and art, and let's say art transforming into network sites, because I was thinking that somehow it sounds very close to what Benjamin was talking about in his artwork essay when he suggests that what occurs in the age of technological reproducibility is a transformation of contemplation into an experience of distraction, so Zerstreuung. Mm-hmm. And I thought that that's an interesting notion if you think about it, and also in let's say, the spectatorship point that was made. Because it seems to me that somehow this is a very, even if it's an uncomfortable observation, it feels very adequate to describe, let's say, our current situation, that we are very distracted most of the time. And that contemplation and spectatorship is something that's very rare. And that in that sense we are more producing maybe than that we are consuming in a, let's say, in a contemplative manner. But maybe it does point, let's say, it does reflect back in a strange way upon people who are busy with reflecting and spectatorship, like I guess most of us. And in the sense that maybe our own position as writers or theorists or people who actively participate in this kind of discourse, because if you want to follow today's discussion, I guess you can't really be distracted. I think you have to be quite attentive. Means that we are in a way also producing something within a certain network of production, and that I'm sometimes a bit curious on, let's say, who is going to who is going to consume it, and how is that fit within the system of templates and networking that you describe as being, let's say, the place of art today? Or maybe there are a bit of a random and scattered observations, but I wondered if you thought about this notion, this idea of Benjamin that contemplation would be displaced by or transformed into distraction.
Well, in any case, yes, but I maybe would tend to use a different idea also from Benjamin, that is the idea of flaneur. And so the contemporary, and I think it's a very good idea because contemporary subject to contemplation is not somebody who sits and contemplates, but moves all the time. Contemporary subject to contemplation is mostly on the train or on the plane, going from place to place. So as subject of contemplation, we begin to circulate. We begin to circulate We begin to go from place to place, and so we become whatever we are. Yeah, otherwise we become very active, and we become very active in a situation in which we take decisions, we make choices under the pressure of time. We are not only distracted, but we have to decide what we are looking at and how we are moving here through all this and how we select and so on and so on. And then you have this idea of profane illumination by Benjamin and other things. But what is important for me is that whatever subject of contemplation today is, he or she is also an object of contemplation, because of course being a part of an exhibition, being a visitor to the exhibition, be it a visitor to an installation space, the visitor becomes also part of this installation, and exhibition becomes also exhibited. So if we go to the exhibition, we look at the things exhibited, but we look also at other spectators. And in many cases, it's much more interesting scene than what is exhibited, in fact, yeah. And people know that they are exhibited, and they include this being exhibited in their strategy of contemplation from the beginning, and this is kind of circulation. So I think we have to develop some kind of discourse and some kind of analysis of contemporary strategies of contemplation that are not so easy describable as it seems to be. In any case, fundamentally different from what we are accustomed to think here in the kind of idealized models from the 18th, 19th century. Yeah, which is still kind of on back of our minds. Yeah, but the real behavior is completely different.
Yeah, can I just pick up on one thing and it's I suppose it's more a pedantic question in a way. It's when you use the term "we," I get nervous. Yeah. When you say about "we," in the sense of being only contemplating on the train, and I know exactly what you mean, and I would well do it myself. So it's not to necessarily misunderstand it, but what you said about the artistic avant-garde in say post 35 in Soviet Union, speaking only to itself, that seems the use of the "we" that you used then seems to typify a kind of contemporary version of that in a certain way. That we are also speaking very much to ourselves. And I don't know if everybody would include themselves in this room within that. I would like to think that, but that's probably very optimistic. And some people might feel quite alienated from that idea of the "we" being the train and the plane, and the contemplation being allowed there. And I suppose going back to the avant-garde, and maybe this is a misunderstanding of the Malevichian avant-garde, but there was an attempt. I know, for instance, in Unovis, where in Vitebsk, where Unovis was established, there were genuine attempts, however feeble and failed they were, to communicate with the proletariat. And certainly the revolution had in its idea, speaking of a "we" which was wider than the "we" today that would be contemplating on the transatlantic plane. And I just wondered how we can reconcile these two. It seems that the avant-garde did have an ambition, even if it was isolated, it had an ambition to communicate, or to at least represent the possibility of communication with another class. And I'm not sure whether we have that anymore, or do we? How do you see that anywhere?
Well, I think that also takes place because, if you read a Critique of Judgment by Kant, then he quotes Saussure, from the same family, but different generation, who says that Swiss peasants look at the German tourists that look at the mountains as complete idiots. Yeah? And then he says that Swiss peasant, because he's living in mountains and is not a tourist, is not capable to look at mountains as static phenomenon, and thinks these Germans are idiots. From that time on, Swiss began to be tourists again, also. Yeah. So Swiss are everywhere, and we have, of course, I am agree that if I say "we," I speak about people, a part of humanity, I speak about part of humanity that is involved in a certain processes. 100 millions of people, but not all of them, of course. But I have a feeling, and that is the same feeling that Avant-Garde had at the beginning, that they will be involved too. Mm-hmm. First of all, it's good if they will be involved. So one should not have, this kind of sentimental attachment to the high culture and all this stuff. It's good if it goes down, yeah. It's good if it disappears. It's good if something new, mass-like, arise that encompasses the whole humanity. That's point number one. Point number two, it will happen. Yeah, whatever you think about that. So it's a process that is privileged, one can say, or maybe there are people privileged who are not involved in it, who knows. But it's a process that is a part of it, but it's distributing itself, and it's growing, it's involving more and more people. Mm-hmm. We are living in a situation where this part of society is growing. And so if I say we about all of them who are already there, but also all of them who maybe will be there in the next generation, maybe in a couple of years, or maybe 20 years. Yeah, we see what happens in India, we see what happens in China, and in other places. Yeah. So.
Well, thanks. Florian.
I was originally referring to this problem that you introduced as a problem of social networking, the problem or the problem of performing a contemporary self. Yeah? Because I think what is actually really at stake, and this is the difference to the analog image production, or to the mirror image, which follows the logic of in a certain way, the logic of the original of the copy, but it's always a kind of binary, either or mode. Yeah? What we're experiencing today in this so-called social networking is an incredible pressure to perform a self that is constantly multiplied. And it's not only a copy of the self. It's not only the kind of misunderstanding of the imaginary when I look into the mirror in the morning. Yeah, it's a permanent multiplication of the self. And I think they really. And this is where time comes into the play. Mm-hmm. These selves have to be performed in real time. Yeah? In order to be observed, truly, but not by the state, but by a kind of society of control that has outsourced all the all the institutions and all the apparatuses, or tendentially tries to outsource all this into the self. And I think this is why it is so important and so crucial and so necessary, to think about strategies, if you want, avant-gardist strategies, to escape these regimes. I think this is what is very much at stake here.
Well, what I try to say, you can't use avant-garde strategy to escape this machine, because avant-garde strategy invented this machine and put this machine on us. And now we are, but it's this utopia. It is this utopia. Of everybody has a right to be an artist. Everybody has a right of aesthetic expression. Okay, but we know that every utopia of this kind turns to be a dystopia, and every right turns to be an obligation. And now we are suffering under that. Yes, of course. It's a terror. It's a terror of aestheticization. It's a terror of design. It's a permanent terror of self-representation. Yes, representation and self-representation is now not a right, but a terror. So the things changed completely. They turned against the subject itself. They became the instance of power over the subject. What was right became a means of control. I completely agree with you. But the point is that we can't escape that at the moment. I don't see a strategy how to escape that. Because if you don't want to be represented, then you are representers don't want to be represented, and so on and so on. So you are inside this play at the moment, and in fact, that was what the beginning, what is the end of my talk. That is not utopia. That is what we are. That is a regime of aesthetic terror. That is a dialectic of Aufklärung. Yeah, dialectic of Aufklärung. That is dialectic of enlightenment at a different level. Yeah, that's what it is. But maybe, as thinking to you, I just thought about something different. But maybe I say that, namely, I read some years ago a novel of Prokhanov. Yeah, Prokhanov, it's a Russian right-wing, almost fascist author. who wrote many novels. I love them all, yeah, but I especially liked one of them, Крейсерова Sonata. And it's about a guy who kind of lost his consciousness, lost his memory, and so on, and he emerged in Moscow, and he's looking for the source of the new Russian Revolution of 91. He asked the question, what is a point in the universe from which these evil spirits of revolution or counter-revolution, whatever, came and occupied Moscow? And it takes 600 and more pages, of his wandering through Moscow, and he finds it. And it's a black square of Malevich. He finds it, he comes to the Tretьяков gallery at night. And what happens? He looks at this black square, and he sees that after the closure of the museum, that original black square has a craquelures, So suddenly, he sees light, red light, coming from them, and he realized that is an entrance of hell. And so this hellfire, begins to intensify after the closure of Tretьяков gallery, and through this craquelures in the black square, demons coming that occupy Kremlin and all the other places, and general stuff and things like that. So that, I mean, black square is so deeply inscribed, in a revolutionary and counter-revolutionary imagination, at least of Russia, that at the moment you ask what is the place of a revolution, what all the spirits came from, the answer can be only black square. It's very interesting how deeply ingrained, certain patterns are, the cultural patterns. I can't skip.
One last question, if there is one, or shall we end on hellfire and evil and the black square?
I think it's good.
I think it's a good ending. I hope you all will be able to come back tomorrow. We now have, I think, a plan for drinks and dinner. In the Dutch manner, we'll have dinner at 5:30. So you're very welcome to join us in the cafe and to continue the conversation with each other, and also with Boris, who will be joining us. Thanks a lot.